So in this video, we're going to take a look at how to use the while loop for something in a program. In this case, we're going to look at using it for validation, which is a very important part of a program, making sure that the user's input is valid. So one of the simple uses is to validate that the input value that the user entered is some value between a certain range. Right? That's a very typical scenario. So here we got a program with x at 0, and we're going to prompt the user for an input. Right. And we're going to tell them, enter a value between, let's say 1 and 10. Right, and we'll sit there waiting for the input. We'll get the input. We'll put it into x. Right. And obviously right there nothing stops us from entering 100ths or -10 or anything of that nature. It takes it and output it and do everything of that nature. Right, let's put an output statement there. So let's validate that they actually entered a value between 1 and 10. We can use a while loop for that. Alright, and we want it so that it only does the while loop when the data is invalid. So when is x invalid? When it's less than or equal to 0. We're not including 0, right? It's 1 through 10. Or x is greater than 10. Right? We want to include 10, so no equal there. And while that's the case, what do we want to do? Well, first we need to tell them that the input is invalid. Right, very simple statement there we'll put, and then again we're going to prompt them for the input, so they know it's invalid, and they know why we're prompting them again to enter a value. So this condition, as long as, make sure you got it right here, is x is less than or equal to 0 or x is greater than 10. It should continue to prompt us for inputs until we finally enter something valid. So we'll run this, and the first time I'll enter a value that is actual valid, so the program will run and output that value. Right, so I'll put a 7. Right, there's the 7. Program ends. No other output statements, no loop executing, nothing of that nature. So let's run it again now with some invalid inputs. Right, so we say 0 is invalid, so let's test it with 0. Right, tells me it's invalid, tell me to input something else, put a negative value in there. Right, still tell me invalid, waiting for me to input it again. Let's put 55, right, that's invalid also. Let's do 11, that's also invalid. Should accept a 1 and a 10. Right, need to test those conditions normally, but we'll put a 10 in, takes it, outputs it, and the loop ends. So we're using this little simple loop to validate input, and this validation is simply checking if it's between a certain values, right, a certain range of values that we expect the user to input. Right, so very simple to input, much cleaner than the if statement. The if statement basically validates it, and if it's invalid, tells the user and doesn't let them do anything else. Really, you can't get any more input, because if you use an if statement to trap that, and you ask them for another input, they can still input something invalid, and then you end up using the invalid thing. So you shouldn't use while loops in this scenario now. Right? Avoid using if statements for validation of this type.